Hello everyone, Annmarie O'Kane here from the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. You might already have seen some of our previous podcasts, so you might already know that I manage the Border People project in the centre. We try to gather up information that's useful to people who live in the island of Ireland. It's especially relevant to those people who live along the border region and those who cross the border from time to time, or sometimes very regularly, are cross-border workers or students or shoppers and many other people. Now we've had, and we continue to get lots of questions that are quite common, and I thought I'd share some of them with you today. So I'm going to share my screen at the moment. Let's see, I'm hoping I'll get this right. So hopefully you can see that. So that's just a screenshot of our website, borderpeople.info, and lots of the information that I'm going to share with you now you'll find on borderpeople.info. So these are the typical issues that keep coming up for us all the time: cross-border employment, tax implications, access to healthcare, social security, retirement pensions, and actually commuting across the border and taking your car, driving license, insurance and that. So really, really practical things. And typically we do, at the moment anyway, because we're in the transition period, we look towards the EU rules for some of the answers to some of these questions that might come up under each heading. Now, of course, we know that Brexit's going to change a lot of where we find the answers. So we might have to look in other places for some of the answers. So at the moment, we know that the EU rules haven't changed because the transition period is in place, and it remains in place until the end of this year, 11 p.m. the 31st of December. The real implications, the impact of Brexit, will take effect. At that time, we will find that people will want to know whether or not they're within the scope of the withdrawal agreement, or whether perhaps they need to look for their rights within the common travel area, or maybe within the future deal. And of course, we don't know what the future deal is, but we do know something about the other two. So the withdrawal agreement at the moment will protect people who are already this year, by the end of this year, have already engaged their rights across the border. So maybe they're already a cross-border worker and they've already decided to move across the border. And so those EU citizens, as they are at the moment, all their rights will be protected within the withdrawal agreement. Now, for people outside of that scope, so if they actually take up a job or engage their rights next year on the 1st of January, then the withdrawal agreement won't have anything to do with them. And they will most likely in this region rely on the common travel area for lots of their rights and entitlements. And we can't really touch on the future deal because it's still being negotiated, although it's very close to the deadline. So if we think in mind, then one of the first topics that I mentioned was cross-border employment. Under the withdrawal agreement, the rights will continue for anyone who is already a frontier worker or wishes to move across the border to take up employment. All of those rights will be protected within the withdrawal agreement. And then within the common travel area, there will be there's rights there as well. But I'll tell you first of all about the workers' registration scheme. So the withdrawal agreement mentions that workers can obtain a document certifying their rights as a frontier worker. And while we haven't heard of a scheme coming from the Republic of Ireland, the UK government has recently issued some information about the frontier worker permit scheme that they are going to launch soon. So the applications will be free of charge. They can be made from inside or outside the UK, and they'll be made online. And they will hope to have the scheme up and running in good time before the end of this year, although we're getting really close. So we're not quite sure when it will appear because the legislation hasn't actually gone through Westminster yet. The scheme will be available to EEA citizens, and they can apply, but British citizens can't apply. So that would mean a frontier worker who was maybe born in Northern Ireland and a British citizen who has used their EU right to move across the border into the Republic of Ireland but retain their job in Northern Ireland, As a British citizen, they won't be able to apply to the scheme. But it's early days yet. The scheme hasn't been launched. The legislation hasn't gone through Westminster, so it still could be tweaked. So we're seeking clarification on that. But an AEA national who is living in the south and is working in Northern Ireland, so non-Irish, non-British, they can apply into the scheme and protect all of the rights that they have at the moment. Now, Irish citizens don't need to actually apply for the Frontier Workers Permit, because they have rights under the Common Travel Area, but they can if they wish, but they don't have to. And the rights and entitlements, workers' rights, will be protected within the withdrawal agreement. That's a discussion for another podcast. But the right to work, an Irish citizen won't need that permit. It comes under, the entitlement comes under the Common Travel Area as well. So the Common Travel Area particularly focuses just on Irish and British citizens and to protect them to a degree. And lots of the rights that are mentioned under the Common Travel Area are really similar to those that are mentioned in the EU withdrawal agreement. So there's going to be rights, and again, only for Irish and British citizens. So our friends and families for other places won't be protected by the Common Travel Area. But frontier workers as they stand at the moment, particularly those who take up a job next year, there will be the continued right to enter each other's jurisdiction, to cross the border without permits or needing visas, to take up employment, to access social security, education, healthcare, and some voting rights linked to residents in the south and in the north. So lots of those rights are really similar, and I suppose that's good to know, that even moving into next year, that maybe while everything will change, there are some rights secured already for us. So let's have a look. So one of the first questions then that we typically get asked after do I have the right to take the job across the border is, okay, I've taken the job, now where do I pay my tax? So I'm not a tax consultant now by any shape or form, but this is the general gist of it. And I would always recommend that a frontier worker would have a chat with an accountant just to put themselves on the right path at the start of any new job. So as a frontier worker, you must pay your income in the country where you earn your income, generally through your employer's PAYE system. But ultimately, your main tax responsibility is always in the country where you live. So whichever side of the border you live, you must submit an annual self-assessment each year. So for a person who's living in the north and working in the south, they must declare their Irish income to the HMRC. So the HMRC will work out what their UK tax bill would have been if they'd earned a similar amount in sterling, and they will take into consideration all of the Irish tax paid and universal social charge. So hopefully that will, once they take that away from the UK tax bill, there'll be nothing left to pay. If there is something left to pay, then that would have to be paid to the HMRC. If there's too much Irish tax paid, it's always worth having a chat with an accountant to see about using some of the more generous tax reliefs that are available on the southern side of the border. Now, for somebody who's living in the south and working in the north, it's very different. They will have to declare their Northern Ireland income to Irish revenue. But then there's a tax relief called a transborder workers relief, and that will be applied to their Irish tax bill, and hopefully it'll reduce or potentially remove any tax at all. So hopefully, fingers crossed, if there's no other income earned on the southern side of the border, hopefully the tax bill there will actually be zero. So that's the general gist of it. That's a very basic gist of it, but it'll put you on the right path, and I'd suggest maybe having a chat with an accountant before to keep yourself on the right track, because sometimes these things can get out of hand quite quickly. Now, alongside taxes, of course, we also pay social insurance. So that's our PRSI in the south and our national insurance in the north. And again, because we're still in the transition period, the EU rules still apply. So at the moment, for cross-border workers, their social insurance entitlement then tends to be linked to their place of employment, where they're paying their social insurance contributions. So for frontier workers who are too ill to go to work and they need illness benefit, they'll make a claim in the country where they are employed. So across the border, if they don't have enough social insurance contributions to qualify, they can ask that the contributions paid in the other jurisdiction can be combined. So national insurance, PRSI can be combined together, and hopefully that will help the person to qualify for a illness benefit. The same goes for maternity benefit as well, linked to employment, and again, social insurance contributions can be combined. Family benefits also linked to employment, and this is a really common one for a lot of families in Northern Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, with cross-border employment. That's generally the one benefit that is exported across the border. Now, frequently people get in touch with us and there's employment on both sides of the border. Two partners, family, some children, two partners, and one works on each side of the border. So in that scenario, the authorities will have a look at where do the children live. So if there's employment on one side of the border and the children also live on that side of the border, it tends to be that side of the border that will pay the full family benefits for that family. If there's a difference, if they've lost out because one side paid and a higher amount would have been paid on the other side of the border, then a top-up payment can be sought then based on the other partner's employment across the border. Other things that can complicate those payments can be linked to family breakdown and maintenance payments. And family benefits can sometimes involve a lot of red tape and paperwork. So we'd always suggest to get in touch with an advisor if you get stuck between the two systems. With pensions, they're also linked to place of employment. So the person will apply where they're resident, and then they'll cite all of their EU and their worldwide record of employment. And then the authorities will talk behind the scenes about who's actually responsible for their pensions. And maybe they'll get paid a pension from more than one place if there's sufficient employment recorded. Now, the one that's different here is unemployment benefit. If a frontier worker is made unemployed, they go home and seek unemployment benefit. So it's the country of residence that applies, that will pay their unemployment benefit. And again, they can take their social insurance contributions back home across the border, and hopefully that will mean that they will be able to be eligible and qualify for a contribution-based benefit and stay away from a means-tested benefit. If the frontier worker is just made partially unemployed, that means there's a contract still in place. So that ties them in to the place of employment, and any maybe top up unemployment benefits would be paid wherever the contract of employment is. So that's a whirlwind through cross-border social security. Now, next year, for frontier workers who have applied under the permit scheme, next year going forward, all of these social security rights and entitlements will be protected within that frontier worker scheme. For people who next year will have to look towards the common travel area rules, it looks like all of the common travel area language and the intentions look really, really close to these EU rights and entitlements. So hopefully there won't be too much divergence, and it looks like they've actually been protected. But again, the common travel area only applies to British and Irish citizens. So if you're from another place, we're looking at the future deal on how that social security coordination will look next year. So just to give you an example then of what that means. So if there's a family living in Strabane and dad works in Strabane in Northern Ireland and mum works in Letterkenny in the Republic, and they have two children. So in this scenario, it's mum who's actually engaging her EU rights to take that job up across the border. So mum's access to illness benefit, the South will be responsible for mum's illness benefit and any future maternity benefits for her. And of course, she'll be able to take any social insurance contributions with her to help her to qualify for those if it's just a new job that she's taken across the border. So the family benefits for this family, the North will pay those family benefits because dad lives in Strabane, the family live in Strabane, and dad too, and dad works in Strabane. So that's 2 out of 3. Now in the North, our family benefits tend to be at a lower rate than in the South, and because of mum's employment, that means that a top-up payment will be paid because of mum's employment in the South. So she'll make an application to the Child Benefit Office in Letterkenny and hopefully get that supplement payment. Now, upon retirement, And we don't have very much information about mum, but if she's been working in the South for a long time, it's the South is potentially responsible for her state pension, but she'll make an application for that pension through Northern Ireland. And the application actually will go to Newcastle upon Tyne, and they'll contact then the Irish authorities because mum will have mentioned it on her application form. So it's mum that's been using her EU treaty rights. She's within the scope of the withdrawal agreement, and hopefully then she has applied to the workers, to the Frontier Workers Permit Scheme and protected all of those rights. Now, healthcare as well is really important for frontier workers. In general, and this is still the rules under the EU, frontier workers are entitled to healthcare both where they live and where they work. And this actually comes under EU Social Security coordination. So that means for somebody who is living in the north and working in the south, they will be entitled to apply for an Irish medical card, but it's means tested and it's really difficult to pass that test if there's any employment involved. But that person shouldn't worry too much because the Northern Ireland healthcare will be available to them due to their residence in Northern Ireland. Now, for the next scenario then on the flip side, for somebody who's living in the south and working in the north, the Northern Ireland medical card will be issued to them because of the EU rules, and they'll have to give additional information upon application, proof of the employment, which will be checked from time to time. But also the EU rules kick in back at home where they live in the Republic of Ireland. They'll also be entitled to an Irish medical card without a means test. So that's very valuable. That's the healthcare north and south for somebody who's living in the south. So that's a big bonus and a good incentive to take a job in Northern Ireland. Now, within Brexit, all of this will be protected under the withdrawal agreement for frontier workers who exist by the end of this year. Those who take up a job next year are outside the scope of the withdrawal agreement, but it's the common travel area rules and that will kick in for Irish and British citizens. And a lot of the language that seems to be coming through on the negotiations between the UK and Ireland and through some of the information available on the government websites and the common travel area seems to imply that a lot of this will stay in place for frontier workers who are British and Irish. Now, for people from other places then we'll have to look for the future deal, and of course there isn't any information on that at the moment. The Irish and the UK government are still negotiating an enduring healthcare arrangement, and it'll replace lots of these rights and also some of the other healthcare entitlements that we have at the moment. The cross-border healthcare directives, they need to replace that. And they're also very keen to continue lots of the cross-border health services that exist now. So our out-of-hours doctors that work along the border region, our ambulances that might come from just across the border in an emergency situation, the cancer care treatment up in the northwest. So there's lots of negotiations and discussions at the moment to keep those all in place. And once we get confirmation of that, or whatever changes that are going to happen, we'll put them up onto our website and we'll circulate them to you. So at the end of cross-border employment then, pensions and retirements, big question. And the gist of it is then that a person will apply for the state pension where we live. I've mentioned that. We're going to mention all of the other countries that we've worked in, and then the authorities get to decide who's responsible. Now, for many of us, a private pension tends to be part of our employment package. And unfortunately, they don't tend to transfer very easily or very cost effectively across the border. And they can present problems for some cross-border workers. Sometimes it isn't worthwhile and they decide to pause one pension pot, take a job across the border and open up a new one with a new employer. But it's really important to talk to an accountant about that. That can get quite complicated, but with good advice, it can become quite straightforward. Now, on retirement, the big issue here is the access to healthcare for cross-border workers. Generally, whenever there isn't a contract of employment, that entitlement to healthcare across the border ends. And that's significant for people who are living south of the border, travelling into Northern Ireland for work. Once that work ends, access to the Northern Ireland healthcare can end, and the non-means tested medical cards, that could end as well. So it's really important to seek advice about safeguarding the healthcare at the end of that cross-border employment if it's going to result in retirement. There are there is a way to have a continuation of care if there is a connection with a long-standing consultant or something like that. But that would, and it is within the EU rules, a continuation of care rule, but it needs approval from doctors and the health trusts. But it's something to have a chat with a consultant or your doctor if you think that's something that you might need. If it was allowed for every other ache or pain, you'd have to go home and see the doctor there. And we're almost there. So commuting across the border, physically taking your car across the border. We get lots of questions about this, and Brexit does change some of the responses. But the general gist of it is your car needs to be registered and taxed where you live. Now, many frontier workers will maybe only be at home, the place where they're resident, for maybe only a couple of days a week. Maybe there's quite a commute, and they stay at their place of employment all week and then maybe come back home at the weekends. But it's okay to have that Northern Ireland reg car, for example, sitting in Dublin all week if it's taxed and registered and insured at home, maybe up in Derry or up in Donegal. Driving licences as well, of course, they're recognised through the EU rules, but with Brexit that changes. And it looks like Irish and Northern Ireland and UK licences will continue to be valid, obviously through transition for the rest of this year and beyond. We have to look for it seems to be the case that EU licences will also be valid in the UK after the end of the year. Driver's permits, international driver permits might be needed for UK driving licence holders further afield, further into Europe at the end of the year. But we have to keep an eye on how that, when we get clarification, we'll pass it with you. But I'd suggest that you keep an eye on the government websites for updates on your driving licences. But it looks like those on this island, Northern Ireland, Irish, will be okay for the rest of this year and next year. It's a bit different if somebody has actually moved across the border and they've taken their licence with them. They will need to be exchanged before the end of the transition. At the moment, they're recognised as a valid licence. At the end of the year, they might not. And you might find yourself having to resit your driving test again. So if you've moved maybe with a Northern Ireland licence across the border into the Republic, get it exchanged while it's still, that exchange programme is still up and valid. And it runs out on the 31st of December. So I would urge you to have a look if you've moved across the border either way and held your licence from home. Car insurance as well. Of course, it's going to be an external EU border that we have here in the island. And many of our insurers are already issuing green cards with our insurance. Some of them, though, are putting limitations on the amount of travel allowed across the border. So it's really important to keep an eye out for maybe any cheaper insurance in particular. Could have quite strict restrictions, and maybe those types of insurance maybe would be more suitable in another part of the UK, for example, that wouldn't have the prevalence of cross-border travel that we would have here. Many of our journeys start in Northern Ireland, end in Northern Ireland, but we've crisscrossed along the border the whole way. So of course we need to make sure that our car insurance is valid. So I'm flying through this now, we're almost finished. So just to recap on all of that, if we're thinking of a new cross-border job, and if we're thinking of next year, in particular, we have to keep that in mind that it will be different. So at the moment, we don't need to register. The transition period is here. We have rights to those cross-border employment, north and south. It will change, of course, because of Brexit. The workers' permit will become available in Northern Ireland. So if you're living in the south and working in Northern Ireland, especially if you're from another part of Europe, it might be worth you're going to have a look at that workers' permit. And as I said, it's not Irish citizens don't need to apply, and British citizens at the moment, as the information stands, can't apply. For people who take up jobs next year, Irish and British will look to the common travel area rules. There's no permission needed. Irish and British can work in each other's jurisdictions. People from other places coming into Northern Ireland to work will need to look at the new immigration rules and the new workers' permits from the UK government websites. Of course, if you're an EU citizen and you are living in Northern Ireland and next year you take a job across the border into the Republic, you're entering the EU again, so that should be straightforward. So the next bullet point, tax. We pay tax where we work. we declare it at home. We speak to an accountant if we think that's getting complicated. Social welfare, we pay our social insurance contributions at work, and we tend to claim most of our benefits then from our place of employment. Except for unemployment benefit, we take our social insurance contributions home and we claim there. Healthcare, under the EU rules at the moment, we're entitled to healthcare where we live and where we work. It looks like under the Common Travel Area rules for next year for British and Irish, that will continue. We're not sure what will happen to people who take up a job from another EU country who come to work in Northern Ireland next year. We're not 100% sure how it's going to work with healthcare, but we'll pass that information on when we do get it. And then for commuting, as I've said, you register your car at home, you insure it at home, and you make sure that it's insured for cross-border journeys. So that was our whirlwind through cross-border living and lots of the questions that we get asked. They're quite simplified questions and quite simplified answers, but I hope it gives you a bit of an idea of where we are at the moment and where we're going through our journey as we pass into the real impacts of Brexit. So lots of information will be available on our website, borderpeople.info. And as more and more clarification comes through on each of these topics, we'll do short podcasts. This is quite a long one. The next one will be quite short, and we will share it on our YouTube channel. So keep in touch, and thanks a million for joining me today. All the best. Bye.